Hey guys, Rachel Smith here, Remax Realtor. We're doing a show called The Real with Rachel, where we get real in real estate. And I am so excited to have on guest today, Rick Cross from Ameristar Mortgage. Yay! Philip Dancer from Dancer Inspections. And Rich Rosario from Land Abstract and Escrow. Our title guy is with us today. And I am just ready to get into it. Let's get right to it. Hard one first, rates. Let's talk about it. What have we seen? Jerome Powell was just on the podium a few days ago. Didn't give us anything fabulous that we really wanted to hear. What is your take on it, and what do you think is going to happen?
Well, rates have been creeping down slowly but surely. So even though the feds aren't reducing the rates right now, investors are creating a down cycle, and it's dropping the rates slowly. But as a consumer buying a house, you don't want rates to drop too fast anyhow, because that would just create more havoc, and people would overpaying for houses now. With the rate drop, everybody would be.
It would be like the floodgates of 2020, essentially. When we think about it, when the rates went so low, everyone that's been waiting to buy, waiting for their rates to drop, would then say, okay, now's my time. And that would be just a culmination of chaos, right. I think, hitting the market, especially when the inventory isn't as high as it was in 2020 to have a selection from. Right. So you'd always have double trouble. You do, you want them to drop, obviously. Yeah. But then I think the other concern is if they drop too low, what is that signaling about our economy, which is the bigger picture. So yeah, all right. Yeah. So I'll have to ask you your predictions moving in for the market as we continue on. But Philip, let's talk about, we're speaking about crazy market, bidding wars. Buyers are dropping inspections still, which, to get into the house, you make that choice. However, on the sell side, for a pre-listing or pre-inspection for a listing, what would you suggest a seller really focus on if they were to have a pre-inspection, or hey, just off your advice right now?
Good question. I see oftentimes there are certain systems that come up that cause buyers to pause in their mind before they decide to ultimately proceed with a transaction. And some of those major systems are things that are centered around the foundation, the roofing system, the HVAC system. So one of the things that I learned early on is we need to we'll set ourselves up for success if we're able to handle the objection before it becomes an objection. Mm-hmm. So if we know that our house has a more advanced in age roof, or the same thing with an HVAC system, what we should do is we should try to bring out the contractors that are responsible for replacing them or servicing them, and then have them tweak up and fix anything that needs to be fixed. That way, if a buyer does come and they're looking at something where it's just very, very obvious that it's more advanced in age, it's much easier to show, yes, we know that, that it's more advanced in age, but look, we just had the roofer come out. We just had the HVAC contractor come out, and they fixed anything that needed to be fixed. For right now, this is ready to use.
Yeah. So there you go. You can have that documentation to counteract maybe somebody negotiated a credit of $15K for a roof, or as you spend a couple $100 to have a specialist come out based off the advice of you, baby, right? They don't have to do that off the bat, but if you do a pre-inspection and say, hey, let's show a little bit more love to this specific mechanical or what have you, and that's an option they can have. So I'm hearing foundation, roof, HVAC is the main focus to keep eyes on when getting ready to list. Mm-hmm. Right.
You could also do electrical panel too. So if you have an electrical panel that's about 20 years old, 30 years old, I think it would be prudent to have an electrical contractor come out, master electrician if possible, and just give a once over on that panel, because there's going to be an antiquated way of how they actually set up the electrical wiring system, which was okay. At that time of the installation, but now we actually have gotten better with our building practices. So if we can have a master electrician, sign off and say this is also ready to use, I think that would also alleviate a lot of concerns in buyers' minds.
Like double tap wires and things like that. So if you have that once over, that alleviates a concern. Just as a buyer, if you're not seeing that all the time like we see it, then to have that already taken care of, it doesn't scare the buyer away. So opinions on home warranties then.
So love home warranties. I know everyone has a different opinion when it comes to insurance, but for me personally, I've actually benefited from having a home warranty. We refreshed our entire house back in 2017, and what I actually learned was that just because you have the home warranty does not mean that the home warranty covers everything. So our setup in our kitchen, we have 2 dishwashers. And when we refreshed it a couple of years later, both dishwashers went out at the same time. So I learned the hard way that you only get to do 1 dishwasher.
Okay.
So you have to, and we have 2 HVAC systems, forced air units. So you need to make sure that you're telling these home warranty companies, hey, I have multiples of the same system if you do. So that way, because you need to make sure that they can cover both.
That they're both covered. Interesting. That's good to know, because I don't think a lot of people think about that when they're doing home warranties. And all the little added coverage that you can do, like pools and septics and things like that. But speaking of insurance, Mr. Rich over here, my title guy, title insurance. What's your thoughts? What is it? What do we do with it?
Yeah, well, title insurance, or title in general, I guess, in the real estate transaction isn't the sexiest or most fun part of everything, but really it's kind of the mechanical back end. And so title is a general concept, just means ownership. And so title just means that you own that thing, whether it's your phone or your car. Everyone knows the pink slip that you have in your car. That's how you know you own it. Yeah. And so title of the house is the same thing. And so there's always going to be jeopardy in the status of someone's title. So land records go back to the start of this country when, I don't know, what do they say? I don't know if we're supposed to say this anymore. But whenever people sail across the ocean. I was going to say, what's the jank that anyway? So when people started coming here, that's when our land records go back to. And so when land was first purchased and sold and kind of distributed amongst people, you're dealing with records that span back a long period of time. And so title insurance, what it does is it's an insurance policy that guarantees throughout all of those years, the person that's standing in front of you today actually owns that property. Now, how could you have any certainty searching back hundreds of years of records? Things are messed up. You can barely read handwriting sometimes when it's in the 1800s. It's scribes. And so what that policy does, it's a one-time premium to guarantee that you own this property. And if anyone were to come forward and say, hey, my great-great-great-grandfather from 1792 left me this property, and here's this deed. It was never recorded, but I am the rightful owner. They might be right. Yeah. And so what that policy does is a Fortune 500 company will essentially litigate your interests up to your purchase price or make you whole. So if you buy a house for $500,000, you get $500,000 in attorney's fees, or you get a check for $500,000 to kind of.
Very interesting. And now I'll make it aware, because title insurance can also be something that's required by the lender. So the lender's policy and then the homeowner's policy, which technically is optional, but I think 99.999% of buyers do obtain that policy. So there's 2 different policies. One's that cover in the lender.
Yes. And so those policies, it's a misnomer oftentimes, because the lenders will, impose a requirement because it's required by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac in order to securitize mortgages. We all heard about the mortgage industry back in 2008 when the big crisis happened. But essentially, they require purchasing this kind of policy as a condition of issuing a loan. However, there's the optional side of title insurance, the owner's policy, that we haven't really touched on necessarily. And that's the policy that guarantees the individual purchasing the home their ownership interest.
Got it.
And so it's important to kind of consider both options, but it's also important to note that the lender's policy absolutely does not guarantee your ownership.
Nothing. There's no security. That is just for them. Yep. Same with mortgage insurance. Kind of, exactly. Right? How mortgage insurance protects just the lender versus the buyer if the buyer defaults.
Yeah, right? Absolutely. Yeah. Protects the buyer too, because if he defaults on it, the mortgage insurance pays for it.
Yep. Interesting. Let's talk about seller credits and how they can be utilized. What is a seller credit? I will tell you that. That is a credit that is negotiated through your buyer agent to, hey, this is towards the buyer's closing costs or whatever they may need. If it's a closing cost or a credit that's negotiated through inspections, for a repair, something along those lines. What can those credits be used for, allowable by the lender? Is that just for their fees, for appraisal? Is there anything else that can be?
I mean, it's a credit, so you can use it for whatever you like.
What about buying down the rate?
Absolutely. You can buy down the rate. You can pay your closing costs. You can negotiate a home warranty. You can, pretty much anything.
All right. Yeah. Are you seeing a lot of people buy down their rate right now?
No, because everybody's sitting back waiting for the feds to drop down.
They figure we'll just wait. That's funny. All right. New construction. Is it important to have an inspection with new construction? Phil?
Oh, it's a must. No questions asked. Because the common the most common response that I see from families when they first engage us for new construction is, but Phil, isn't this new? And I always tell them, yes, it is. It is new. The material is. The material's new. But it's still a factory that had a factory defect right from the assembly line. It's still material that's damaged in transit, damaged while unloading, damaged while installing, not installing correctly.
Yeah.
Or just a lot of people. Just a lot of people, or something was installed correctly, and then you bring in the next contractor, and the next contractor damages the previous contractor's work, because what they're doing is they're actually just following the plan details to build the house. So if contractor A that goes in first didn't follow the plan details very well, and then contractor B now goes in and is following their plan details to a T, contractor A's work might actually get in the way of plan B or contractor B's work. So contractor B will actually disassemble contractor A's work to run their systems correctly. But here's the kicker. Contractor B will not tell the project manager what they had to do. They leave it to the project manager to figure it out.
Yep. It's like, it's
Isn't
like
that crazy?
Yeah, that is crazy. But you do see that more often than not, unfortunately, however, which just re-emphasizes how important it is to get a new construction inspection. Yay.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, your home is probably your biggest investment that you've bought into so far in your life. So you want to make sure you're buying a good product. Even like the story you were just telling us about the brand new construction where the guys clogged up the drain.
Yeah.
You know.
Exactly. Because when builders are selling you something, because that's what they're doing, they're selling you something and they're charging a premium for it. They walk you into a model home, and it's just very seductive. They're putting really high end stuff in the homes. Mm-hmm. They're showing you a certain paint level, finishing level for paint and drywall, and the trim and the staging. So they're essentially saying this is the product that you're going to receive. Now the product that is actually being delivered, now that's something that could possibly be different. And since you're paying a premium for that particular service and that end result, you need to make sure that what you were promised is actually what's being delivered.
What's being, per the contract. And we've dealt with that before. Going through a blue tape everywhere, right?
Yes, we have.
And then it's also nice because while that's still under construction or being wrapped up with the punch out list, they can go through and rectify all those things with new construction versus resale. You may not be so lucky to get your items addressed, but in order for new construction to fly, to be delivered, the buyer to accept it, those things have to be addressed. So that's always good to know. We talked about pre-inspections. We're seeing buyers that are, again, executing offers and closing without inspections. So, Phil, give me an idea. Is it wise to have a buyer come in with an inspector after closing, kind of get the once over, punch out list themselves as to what needs to be done?
That's a great question. It's still really important to have a home inspector come in and essentially create their own assessment in terms of the condition of the property. Now, remember, a home inspection is a general inspection, meaning it's not an exercise to uncover or discover everything that could possibly exist, currently or in the future in your home. But when done correctly, it's a great tool to be able to come up with a to-do list of things that you can start to use to care for the home over the years. So naturally, anything that might be immediate would be what we call a safety concern. Those are the things that you want to address first. But oftentimes what I've found over the years is a lot of the needs of the home actually just fall into the maintenance category. So you never want to look at the home, or at least my opinion is, you don't want to look at the home inspection report from a totality standpoint, because if you look at it from that viewpoint, any home actually gets overwhelming.
It gets so overwhelming.
So what you want to do is you want to pick the first 5 things that you want to do in year 1. And then do that.
And slowly just go down the checklist.
Do the next 5 things in year 2. And then do bite-sized chunks. That way it's just more easy.
Yeah, don't eat the elephant in one big bite, right?
No.
Piece at a time. All right, my title guy, I'm back to you. Give us just an idea, a brief synopsis as to how this all works. We give you a contract, we being the realtors. We give you a contract and say, here, go to town. What are you going to then do with that contract? Are you going to go down to the courthouse?
Yeah, basically. So I'm going to take the contract and I'm going to digest it. I'm going to look at all the different terms and I'm going to figure out what we're doing. First thing, obviously, is I'm going to figure out which property we're transacting. So I'll look at the street address and then I'll look into the tax records and I'll figure out, okay, this is what the state considers these people to own. And then I go to the courthouse and I chain back 60 years and I say, who's owned this property for the past 60 years? And just figure out, okay, it was Mr. and Mrs. Smith in 1950. And then they sold to Mrs. Jones, who then sold to her son, who then passed away and inherited to his daughter. And I go through all there and I make sure that, okay, through all of these transfers in the real property, there's no liens or anything that's attaching against the property that are outstanding from past owners. And so that when we go to settlement on the closing day, we're sitting around the table and the buyer and seller are confident that the seller's not going to be responsible for anything in the past, and the buyer's going to take title clear from any of the
Clear
past.
from any, yeah.
It's great.
What's the crazy situation that you ever had?
Well, this is a horrible story for people. And this is actually in Baltimore City. The property that I'm talking about was owned by an LLC. So this is always a kind of a suspect situation whenever an LLC is selling property. And there had been, this was unbeknownst to everyone, there had been a older woman who was living in the property for a number of years. She had recently moved to a retirement facility. And so the property was vacant. And then the children who were managing their mother's affairs had kind of left the country. We weren't involved in this transaction, but I was privy to it for another reason. Anyway, as someone comes forward, because the property had been invested in this LLC, and they list the property. The real estate agent doesn't know anything. The listing agent had no idea that this impersonator, I guess I didn't clarify that, this person was a fraudster, came forward and claimed to be the owner. Because there's not a lot of verification that goes into determining who owns entities. And so they had sold to this first-time homebuyer couple who was very excited to move into the property, only to find out that when these kids came back from vacation, that they didn't own the house that they thought they did. And so it was a crazy scenario, but luckily these two individuals who did purchase the property purchased an owner's title insurance policy. They were made whole, the mortgage was satisfied.
So what was the result? The kids that came back from out of the country were like, yeah, this is our house, goodbye?
They won. So it was litigated, and obviously, I mean, when someone sells a house, they don't know.
Oh my gosh,
it's their
those poor first-time home buyers.
Oh, them. But the greatest thing was that their premium was not that much money in order to get made whole in that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
just a crazy story, but
that's another good example of title insurance. Good to know. All right, let's get down to the one that we've been waiting for, buyer agency and the market predictions moving forward for the second half of the year. So there's been some recent news about buyer agency and what could be happening with that from a professional standpoints. What are you guys thinking? Even Phil, I mean, because you work with a lot of buyers and sellers. You obviously are a mortgage and title. We'll start with you, Rick. What do you think's happening with the buyer agency? How do you feel about it? And what are your predictions moving forward?
I am very much against it. How are you going to take a young couple coming out of college with student loans and have them put down a down payment? Let's just say they're putting down 3%. So now they're supposed to come up with another 2.5% to pay the agent that's showing them the house. So I'm a strong believer in the seller should be responsible for paying both sides of the transaction.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. And when you say seller be responsible, let me do a little clarification from a listing agent standpoint. So from a listing agent standpoint, when we go to sign that listing agreement with our client, we are a representation of our brokerage. I'm with RE/MAX, so I go as a salesperson representing them, signing an agreement for them to choose me as a list agent and representation, and here's the fees that are involved, whether it's 6%, 5%, what have you. Then I get to choose on that line how I share that commission. Do I want to keep it all to myself? Probably wouldn't be a very good realtor, right? Or do I want to share with my other buyer agents that are able to bring those buyers that are well qualified, ready to go, and educated to not get out of the contract over something silly, ready to bring to the table? So when we do our listing agreements, it is between the seller and the brokerage salesperson. And then there is a line in the Maryland contracts, as you know, are very scrupulous. They're a lot more detailed than other states, where we choose how we'd like to share and the amount of that buyer agency commission. Now, that listing agreement is signed by the seller. I think where the negotiations would be is the amount on the listing agent side. But in this world, I feel, in this area per se, if you really want to make a smooth transaction, you're going to want to work with the buyer agent professional on the other end that, again, just to reiterate what I said, is going to bring a well-qualified buyer that isn't going to get, obviously is going to get financing, but is going to be able to walk through the contract process, walk through the escrow process, and understand it and be educated. I think that there's value to that. And so what you're paying is the listing agent and the connections that can be made between the listing agent and the buyer agent, right? And for us to be able to kind of go through it. Phil, what do you think from an inspection standpoint?
So for me, knock on wood, it hasn't really impacted me in what I do on a daily basis. But I will. My opinion is that since there's such a small inventory and it's not getting any better, and everything is getting more expensive, the last thing we want is to make the barrier to entry even harder. So it's not going to fix the problem. It's only gonna make it worse. So everything that we can do to try to make it as easy as possible for someone to buy the next home, that's what we really should be doing.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's going to be quite interesting as we move along. But Rich, what do you think?
Well, I think that the entire NAR settlement, I guess the plaintiff's attorneys couched their reasoning in kind of consumer protection. And I think that the claim that buyers are somehow harmed by having their representatives advocate on their behalf is rather extreme. And I think there's a couple things that the settlement doesn't really address. So first of all, it's the nerves of entering into the home buying process. People are not ready to go usually. They need a lot of nurturing and a lot of education to be able to understand what they're about to get involved in, because it sounds great to move out of an apartment and get your own piece of property and be able to take pride in something. But when push comes to shove, it's really scary because you're signing up, most people, for a 30-year commitment that you can't really get out of that easily, right? You can sell, but it's not that quick, So I think that from that perspective, there's just going to be a new mechanism to compensate buyers agents. I mean, unless this world just totally turns upside down and the whole market gets shaken up, I just don't see how it's going to change. It's just going to be more of a negotiating process and a little bit more transparency perhaps around what buyers agents are going to make. But for the most part, I mean, I think you can say, Rachel, buyers agents are pretty transparent about what they're making. I don't see a lot of times when people are shocked at the settlement table, like, oh, wow, I can't believe you're making this.
Unless it's like, yeah.
And so I think that's really important. And the other thing I really can't understand from our settlement is how are buyers supposed to tour and see homes? Because listing agents are running around doing 90,000 things, and that's the whole purpose for a buyer's agent. How is someone selling their home, even if they for sale by owner? How are they going to trust this person? You're letting people into your home with all of your valuable belongings, all of your things, and you're just going to have random people coming by without representation. It's just to me, I that's the part.
Yeah, I'm kind of mind blown by it, to be honest with you. I have very strong opinions on it, but maybe that's for the next. That's a whole show in itself, right?
But it's a great point. I can't understand that.
Right. So you're buying a $500,000 house and you save up, say, 3% to put down on it, which is a Fannie Mae product. And then all of a sudden you see, well, they're not offering any seller real estate commission for the selling agent. So your closing costs just went up another $15,000. I mean,
or you don't have buyer agency. What are your thoughts on how they're going to deal with VA buyers? Because they can't have fees charged, right?
That's a whole different animal, because the VA in this environment, if you're doing 100% loan,
I've seen a couple of them.
Bids.
All depends on who the agents are,
right?
To know if they're going to get it done or not. But there's another power in having a buyer
that's a great product, but 100% loan with all these escalation clauses going.
But how do you feel with the buyer agency? Do you feel like there's from a legal?
They're going to be eliminated if you have to do 100% loan. Where are you going to get the money to pay your seller agent?
It's been proposed to finance it as an exception to Reg Z, so I know that might be a little bit too much to talk about in this scenario, but basically there's a bunch of regulations that determine who's eligible to purchase homes, and there's been a proposition, obviously, to exclude those costs from debt ratios. So basically, I think there's a trial in some markets throughout the country kind of permitting something like this. There's also another trial for 40-year mortgages, which I'm not exactly a fan of. It might be good for the market generally right now, but that's a long time.
Well, they tried that once before and it didn't work.
Yeah, so I just don't know that that's going to be a thing that takes off.
It's lengthening the amortization of it all.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I don't know. So
interesting. Well, I guess everybody will just have to stay tuned to the next Real with Rachel to find out more about how we feel about buyer agency in the market as we move forward. Gentlemen, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you for having us.
I appreciate it. All right, cheers to the second half of 2024. Yay!